The Halloween House by Matt Stanton. It had been 5 full months since William Miller had moved his family into their dream home, and he doesn't believe that his neighbor Mr. Waits had cut a single blade of grass in all that time. 5 full months. Miller had to see that crime against the eyes grow. He had to look at that jungle every time he drove to the office, picked up his kids from select soccer practice, or go on his bi-monthly date night with his wife, Ellen. He wondered if the real estate agent mowed Mr. Waite's grass just to finalize the sale. Miller loved his new home. The neighborhood was quaintly tucked away in a quiet, tree-lined foothill. Despite its impression of solitude, it was only a 3-minute drive to the interstate and 12 to the heart of downtown. The structure itself was modernized while still keeping the character of a home built during the suburban housing boom of post-World War II. The home had a small porch that rested between the living room window on the left and a 2-car garage on the right. It was the perfect size for a family of 4. Miller had even set up his own office on the backside, which overlooked Stanton's Park. In the distance, you could make out the city's downtown skyline. The only blight in his living situation was that monstrosity of Mr. Waite's patch of real estate. Miller's neighbors to his left and right kept their homes in the finest of order. On the left, Mr. Nicholson had a standing weekly appointment with the lawn care company. On his right, the Branch family had even got their yard resodded the previous year. Branch knew how to keep a yard in fine shape, even if he had that ugly lawn gnome with the wonky eyes the centerpiece of his flower bed. All 3 households had children of a similar age. On the 4th of July, Ellen Miller invited the families over to celebrate with a backyard barbecue. She asked if William was going to invite Mr. Waits. He snarkily responded, "Yeah, I put the invitation on top of his lawnmower." Miller didn't know much about Mr. Waits. During the barbecue, he inquired about his mysterious neighbor. Mr. Branch and Mr. Nicholson offered a few select pieces of information. Apparently, Mr. Waits had lived on the block longer than anyone. He lived alone and didn't have any children. Mr. Nicholson remembered that he used to have a small dog, but that was at least a decade ago. They didn't know what he had done for a living, but they believed it was something to do with the arts. The only thing that they were firm about was, just wait until Halloween. The vagueness confused Miller. Neither neighbor would go into more detail. They just kept repeating, just wait until Halloween. What happens on Halloween? Does Mr. Waits come out with a shotgun and shoot at trick-or-treaters? Does he stand on his front porch and scream about how, "You're all sinners, choose the Lord or burn for eternity"? Does he finally mow his lawn? The morning of October 30th came, and Miller went out his front porch to pick up a package that had just arrived. It contained an Iron Man costume for his son Kevin. Kevin wanted to be his favorite Avenger, but Miller had waited until the week of Halloween to finally go to the costume store, so it had already been sold out. He had to pay double to get it shipped next day. Miller wasn't much of a fan of Halloween. He was mainly going through the motions so his children wouldn't bring it up years later in a therapy session about having an emotionally absent father. Miller noticed a dandelion had popped up next to his mailbox. He bent over and plucked it. Before returning up his driveway, Miller looked across the street, and for the first time he saw his neighbor, Mr. Waits. He had thought he'd seen him through a window a few times, but this was the first time in exposed light. Mr. Waits was a towering and spindly man. He stood at least 6.5 feet tall, and had salt and pepper hair that was matted to his scalp. His clothes hung loosely on his bony frame. His long, twig-like fingers were wrapped around an assortment of packages. "Those must be the Bibles he's going to hurl at children," Miller whispered to himself. Miller returned to his kitchen and placed the package in front of his son. "Special delivery for Iron Man." Kevin, with a mouthful of cereal, exclaimed, "Really? Yay, thanks, Dad." Miller gave a small smile as he moved towards the coffee pot to pour himself a cup. Autumn, the freckle-faced youngest member of the family, paused eating her scrambled eggs with grape jelly to let everyone know, "I'm gonna be a princess." "We know," You better keep up this year. I want all the candy. We're not stopping because your hat is too heavy, Kevin warned his little sister. It's not hats, stupid. Princesses wear tiaras. Ellen, trying her best to be the motherly mediator, interjected with a calm tone. Hey, no yelling at the table. We're all going together. We're going to get so much candy you'll be toothless by Thanksgiving. Ew, the siblings exclaimed in unison. Taking a seat at the table next to his wife, Miller put his hand on the small of her back. Mr. Waits finally came out of his dungeon. What? He did? What does he look like? Ellen eagerly awaited his response. Well, it's official. We live across the street from a scarecrow. Ellen mockingly slapped her husband on the shoulder. Stop it. Did you say hello? Miller scrunched his face before another sip of coffee. No, why would I do that? Frustrated, Ellen explained. To get to know your neighbor. He lives all alone. I'm sure he'd love a little conversation. Just then, a loud motor erupted from across the street. Miller raced to the living room window to see what could be the cause of this chaos, spilling some of his coffee on his navy pajama pants. It was Mr. Waits. He was finally mowing his yard. He had a green, rusty riding lawnmower with twin bags attached to catch the clippings. How this piece of machinery was running was almost as shocking as the work being done. Black smoke bellowed from underneath the engine, but despite its noise pollution, it seemed to be doing an effective job. The blades spun rapidly underneath Mr. Waits, creating a disturbingly mangled racket. Mr. Waits bounced around on top of the captain's chair, looking down to see what was directly in front of him. Who knows what type of woodland creatures had created a habitat in front of his yard over the past 5 months. Ellen had also made her way over to the window. Settled up next to her husband. Look at that, Will. You could have talked about lawnmowers. She kissed her man and patted him on top of his head gently before turning her focus to the children. Come on, kids. I'm taking you to school today. 5 minutes and we hit the road. Miller was working from home today, a luxury that his sales job afforded him. He only had a few video calls to make, so he could keep an eye on his recently appearing neighbor. A few hours had passed as Miller toiled away doing mundane office work upstairs. He wasn't alone, as his rescue dog Biscuit rested on the worn-out dog bed at his feet, tucked underneath his desk. Normally, the rear view of his home, that was filled with senior citizens doing their fitness walks around Stanton's Park Lake, would be enough to keep his interest. This wasn't the case today, as he often caught himself wondering, what was Mr. Waits up to? He promised himself that he needed to stick to his work tasks, and that he would treat himself during lunch hour, with a peek out the living room window. The time had finally come that his phone's clock read 11:45 a.m., and he figured that was close enough. Miller, with Biscuit close behind, descended down the 10 carpeted stairs to the ground floor. He trotted over to his living room window to see what transformation had taken place once Mr. Waits had finally deforested his front yard. To Miller's disapproval, most of his view was blocked. 2 large delivery trucks had pulled in front of Mr. Waits' house, obscuring Miller's line of sight. Multiple men dressed head to toe in brown were wielding handcarts stacked to the brim with boxes. The men held firmly with their left hands on the bar of the carts, while trying to secure the packages with their right arms as to not have the contents spill upon the sidewalk. Miller's mind jumped to an array of conclusions of why Mr. Waits had made such an oversized order. Was he hoarding up on non-perishable food for the year, and that's why I never see him leave? Was he making a bomb to blow up the trick-or-treaters? Was he preparing for a standoff with the local authorities? Miller pulled up a dining room chair and kept an eye on the scene that was taking place in front of his home. For an hour he sat there leering, trying to guess what were the contents of each box. Once the steady stream of deliveries finally stopped, the trucks pulled away. The mountain of cardboard squares had created a tan fortress on Mr. Waits' porch. His door opened, and the frail man stepped forward. Mr. Waits had a stoned look on his face as he started shifting through his delivery. He looked up after a moment and his eyes glanced towards Miller's direction. An intense jolt of paranoia exploded through Miller's chest. Miller dashed to the right and slid out of view. As he collapsed to the hardwood floor in a panic, he shrieked under his breath, "Oh my God, did he see me? Am I going to be added to his hit list?" As he contemplated his course of defense, Biscuit came over and gave him a kiss directly on the mouth. Miller did his best to wipe off the senior dog's residue from his face when the alarm on his phone started to clank away. Miller's video call was about to start in 5 minutes with one of his buyers. His investigation would have to wait until later that evening. Still feeling cautious on whether or not he had been seen, Miller crawled on his elbows and knees towards the staircase, looking like one of his son's plastic green army men. Biscuit waddled behind him. Fearing that he would be seen again, Miller waited until nightfall to take up his position in front of the living room window. Learning from his previous mistake, he pulled the blue curtains almost shut, allowing for a small, unobstructed sliver so he could peep on his untrustworthy neighbor. God only knows what diabolical scheming took place this afternoon, he thought as he kept a menacing eye in the opening of the curtains. Where he expected to see barricades and landmines being planted, Miller was surprised by the scene across the street. Mr. Waits had mowed his grass, but left a 10-by-10-foot area not manicured by that hell beast he called a lawnmower. That area was fenced off, and 6 tombstones were planted to make a temporary graveyard. It resembled Boot Hill from the OK Corral. Evenly placed throughout the rest of the yard were huge inflatables that featured cartoon characters dressed in ghost costumes and pumpkin outfits. A generator lowly rumbled, keeping all inflated as they gracefully flapped in the gentle wind. On the brick area of Mr. Waite's home, swirling images of witches danced about on broomsticks. On Mr. Waite's garage door, a fake set of canine teeth and bloodshot eyes had been added to make it seem as if the house was ready to chew up anyone who came walking too close. Miller looked on with untrusting eyes. This had to be all part of some diabolical plan, he thought. How could someone care so little about their home's appearance all year long and go so overboard for Halloween? This had to be a trick to get innocent bystanders to become collateral damage once he went on his killing spree. Eventually, Miller went to bed, but his mind wouldn't rest easy as he kept thinking of the phrase, "Just wait until Halloween." Halloween morning, William was the first to wake up in the Miller household. It was obvious that a deep night's sleep had evaded him, as his bloodshot eyes were highlighted by dark circles around them. Today was the day that Mr. Branch and Mr. Nicholson had warned him about. What had that wackadoo Mr. Waits planned? Miller went to the living room and noticed that an unmarked van was parked on the street to the right of Mr. Waits' yard. Cables spilled out of the rear door, and a tall antenna rested on top. Had someone tipped off the police of a possible standoff situation? Were they wiretapping Mr. Waite's phone line? It was only a matter of time before the local news crews would arrive. Miller thought to himself, if I get interviewed, I'm not going to say he was a quiet man that kept to himself. I'm going to let the whole Tri-County area know. I never trusted that guy. Anyone who treats their yard like he did had to be up to no good. The rest of the Miller family sleepily came down the stairs, followed by Biscuit. With sleep still resting in their eyelids, the family wasn't ready for William's energy. "Kids, when you go trick-or-treating tonight, I don't want you to go across the street. Just skip it. There will be enough candy." The patriarch of the household started laying down the night's guidelines. "Autumn, Kevin, go get your school clothes on. I have to talk to your dad." Ellen tried to hold it together as the children went back upstairs. "Will, why are you acting like a loon? It's Halloween. You're taking this nosy neighbor thing too far." Miller tried to be poised so that his message would be listened to. "Honey, I know this sounds nuts, but I have a bad feeling about that guy." 6 o'clock came, and hordes of children spilled out on the neighborhood sidewalks. Parents with strollers followed scores of tiny superheroes, zombies, ghosts, and princesses. The sound of giggles filled the crisp air as each collection of children made their way down each driveway. The epicenter of the neighborhood became apparent immediately. It was in front of Mr. Waite's home. A stage that was built that afternoon now was populated by a group of college-age musicians. They all had matching jeans and black leather jackets. The group featured 2 guitar players, a bassist, and a drummer. Once all the amps had been turned on and the instruments received their final tuning, the drummer counted off 1, 2, 3, 4. The band blistered into a cover song by the horror punk band The Misfits. The band was full of raw energy. Song after song, they played the soundtrack for all the gleeful trick-or-treaters as they made their way throughout the neighborhood. The night turned into a blur for Miller. Families he didn't recognize just kept coming and coming. The spread at Mr. Waite's was unparalleled. He had mountains of chocolate bars, bags of potato chips, and fruit candies that spilled out of the bowls that rested on the tables in front of his yard. As the band kept playing, children would take handfuls of candy from the bowls in front of Mr. Waite's. No matter how much was taken, he would just unload another bag, cascading it down like a waterfall of candy wrappers. Mr. Waite's had even put out large crock pots of warm food for the parents. He had a hot chocolate station that offered paper cups for any passerby to fill. Miller went over and poured himself a cup of hot chocolate. He held the cup to his lips and took a drink. It was delicious. It was so rich and creamy, with the perfect amount of sweetness as not to become overpowering. It was 8:05 and the city's curfew for trick-or-treaters had passed. Yet the crowd in front of Mr. Waite's home had only grown to full capacity. All the trick-or-treaters had their pillowcases filled with the evening's loot. Neighbors had brought out lawn chairs and blankets to snuggle up next to each other. A police car parked in front of Miller's driveway. Now they show up, Miller thought. As the officer stepped out of his car, Miller quickly approached him. "Sir, is there something I should be concerned about? Did you get an anonymous tip? I live across the street and—" The officer stared blankly at Miller. "What? You live next to the Halloween house? You have the best view of the fireworks." Miller questioned. "Fireworks?" Almost on cue, a loud whistling shot straight up from behind Mr. Waite's home, and a large burst of light exploded into the fall sky. For 10 solid minutes, a colorful and boisterous display brought the evening to its climax. Miller looked to his family. He watched as his children gazed skyward while being held by their mother, Ellen, the love of his life. The 3 smiles that captivated his heart were on full display, while he was on the sidelines, bogged down in pettiness and imaginings that didn't have merit. He saw the pure joy had been staring him straight in the face, and all he did was go on an unwarranted warlock hunt. He felt like an imbecile. Mr. Waite's lived alone and still found a way to give the neighborhood an annual night that they'd always remember fondly. As the last orange blast of fireworks exploded across the cloudy Halloween night sky, the crowd let out an uproarious combination of applause and congratulatory cheers. Mr. Waite stood in front of his porch and took a bow. He was grinning ear to ear. "To Cindy!" shouted someone from the crowd. "To Sydney!" exclaimed Mr. Brock. More and more neighbors followed suit. Mr. Waite's grin started to disappear from his face. His gaze started to tilt downwards to the ground, and his shoulders slumped downward, making a long frame look far less imposing. Miller could tell he was trying to keep his spirits high, but a heaviness was coming over his neighbor. Who was Sydney? Ellen and the children walked towards the front porch. Kevin and Autumn could barely carry their pillowcases stuffed with sweets. "Dad, did you see those fireworks? They were amazing!" screamed Kevin. Ellen grabbed her husband's hand and turned her neck to see what William was staring at. They both stood quietly as they saw their neighbor, weepy-eyed, pass through his front door and turn off his lights. Only 2 days previous, Mr. Waite's was an enemy to William Miller. After tonight, the petty grievances were cast aside. Miller didn't know the whole story, but in that moment, a neighbor's lawn didn't seem like an important detail. The Halloween House by Matt Stanton. For more stories, go to youtube.com/MattStantonComedy. Thank you for listening.